Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are really digging into something big. We're looking at how German strategic thinking changed, or maybe evolved over, what, 3 decades? Basically covering both world wars.
Yeah, it's a huge time frame, 1914 right through to 1945. And our mission, really, is to get under the skin of this core intellectual struggle within the German military.
This constant, almost obsession they had, the quest for the short, decisive war.
Exactly. And how that drive just kept crashing against the reality of modern industrial warfare. You know, these long, grinding wars of attrition.
It's quite a contradiction when you lay it out like that.
It really is. We're essentially charting maybe a 70-year intellectual collapse in some ways. And we've pulled from some fantastic sources for this. Michael Geyer on machine warfare is key here.
Right. Geyer's work is fundamental.
And Gunther Rothenberg's analysis of the general staff architects, Moltke and Schlieffen. Plus, you know, the strategic context from Michael Howard and operational insights from people like John McGrath, Jonathan House, and Williamson Murray. We've got a lot to draw on.
And that central conflict, like you said, it comes through in the sources. Geyer calls it an idealistic strategy, doesn't he? This belief that pure military brilliance could somehow deliver a quick win, separate from all the political messiness and the industrial reality of a long war.
That belief system was almost the identity, the core of the professional German officer corps. Strategy for them was this exclusive thing, almost sacred.
Like only military professionals had the key.
Yeah, they possessed this certain knowledge of war as they saw it. And the real tragedy of this whole period is watching that core idea that strategy is somehow pure, separate from politics, just get demolished by technology.
Only to be sort of picked up again and then twisted by political ideology later on.
Exactly, consumed by it. So we'll track this whole cycle. The failure in 1914, then the rise of what Geyer calls the military machine culture during the First World War, and then finally that really destructive mix of technocracy and ideology leading into the Second World War.
Okay, so where do we start? The foundation, right? This German belief system really built by Moltke the Elder.
Moltke the Elder, yeah. He's rightly called the architect. I mean, the modern general staff system. That's him. He saw this basic geopolitical fact about Prussia and then Germany.
They were vulnerable.
Right. Stuck in the middle, potential wars on multiple fronts. And that meant they just couldn't afford a long, drawn-out war against a coalition of enemies. It wasn't an option.
Speed wasn't just nice to have, it was essential for survival.
It was a geopolitical necessity, absolutely. Yeah. So he built a system designed to deliver that speed.
And his big innovation was how he linked strategy and operations, made them seamless.
That was his genius, yeah. Rothenberg really highlights this. He created this continuous flow. Before him, you know, mobilizing the army was one thing, logistics, politics, and fighting was another. Moltke fused them.
How so?
Mobilization, using the railways for concentration, movement towards the enemy, and then the actual fighting it all became one coordinated sequence, planned from the start. And the goal wasn't just to beat the enemy.
No, it was about annihilation. The Vernichtungsschlag.
The battle of annihilation, exactly. Total destruction.
But how? I mean, even then, technology was making frontal attacks pretty deadly.
Yeah.
Rifled guns and all that.
He knew that. He was very aware of the increasing lethality of firepower. So the annihilation couldn't come from just a head-on clash. It had to be achieved by strategic envelopment.
The Kesselschlag, the cauldron battle.
Right. Trap them, destroy them quickly, get it done before they could dig in or before a long war of attrition set in. But, you know, pulling off a huge envelopment with potentially hundreds of thousands of men that needed sophisticated control.
Which brings us to the general staff system and mission tactics.
Exactly, the famous Auftragstaktik.
That's a concept people still talk about a lot today. Auftragstaktik.
But what did it actually mean back then in Moltke's system? And why was it so crucial for that speed they needed?
Well, it was basically Moltke realizing that war was getting too big, too fast, too dynamic for one person at the top to micromanage everything. He had that famous line, you know, no plan of operations survives the first collision with the main enemy body.
So you can't plan every detail. Right. So his system emphasized decentralized initiative. Commanders were given the overall goal, the strategic intent, the mission, the Auftrag, and then they were trusted to figure out how to achieve it based on the situation on the ground, without constantly asking for new orders.
Okay, so that fosters initiative, speed.
Yeah.
Keeps things moving.
Tremendous speed, yes. But it also had a potential downside, a kind of fatal flaw baked in.
Which was?
That decentralized action could actually undermine the overall plan if commanders weren't perfectly synchronized, or if they didn't fully grasp the bigger picture, initiative could become counterproductive.
So it's a high-wire act.
Yeah.
High risk, high reward. Built on the idea that Germany's weakness needing speed demanded this kind of strategic boldness.
It absolutely did. And look, the German wars of unification, Prussia's victories, they seemed to prove him right. The system worked.
But then came Schlieffen, Alfred von Schlieffen, and he took Moltke's successful model and kind of ossified it, turned it into something rigid.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Schlieffen became obsessed with one specific aspect, the envelopment. He elevated Hannibal's victory at Cannae thousands of years earlier into this universal, timeless strategic truth, the cult of Cannae.
So why did he see this ancient battle as the only way to fight a modern war? He was chief of the general staff from 1891 to 1906, right? Facing a very different world.
He was, but facing that same core problem. France on one side, Russia on the other. And still that need for speed. So for Schlieffen, the answer seemed obvious, almost forced.
Concentrate everything against France. Knock them out quickly.
Exactly. Crush France first, in the West. Use Germany's superior numbers, its mass, its industrial capacity, especially the railways, to achieve a decisive victory fast. He explicitly rejected attrition. Williamson Murray makes this point clearly.
Why? Why was attrition so unthinkable for him?
He believed Germany just couldn't sustain it. Interruptions to industry, to trade, a long defensive war. He thought it would strangle Germany. So his plan was this huge gamble on a knockout blow, purely military.
And this connects back to that idea of the professional military caste, right? The ones with the certain knowledge of war. They insisted strategy was their domain, separate from politics.
Absolutely. Schlieffen demanded operational necessity. The need for mass, speed, violating Belgian neutrality had to override any political concerns. Politics shouldn't interfere with the military's job of winning.
It really is the ultimate expression of that idealistic strategy Geyer talks about. Strategy limited only by military capability, not by politics or economics.
Schlieffen's whole plan was designed to limit the war by winning it quickly through sheer military genius. It was this intellectual fortress built to keep out the messy reality of modern industrial society.
A mindset, as Geyer argues, that was just bound to fail when it finally hit the real world, when it faced an enemy who could also mobilize resources on a massive scale.
Precisely. So you have the plan, the dogma, the legacy of Moltke, all set for this quick, decisive victory. But then comes 1914.
And the collision with reality. Part 2. The tactical impasse of World War I. Because the technology had already changed everything, hadn't it?
It had. And the general staff, for all their professionalism, maybe hadn't fully absorbed the implications. Jonathan House talks about those two big waves of technological change in the 19th century.
First wave. Rifled breech loaders, railways.
Yeah.
Made old formations obsolete.
Right. And the second wave, from the 1880s onwards, smokeless powder, quick-firing artillery, machine guns, high-explosive shells that made coordinating different arms, like infantry and artillery, absolutely critical just to survive on the battlefield.
And Michael Howard points out this created a huge divide in thinking. You had civilians, like Jan Bloch, this Polish banker, arguing that modern firepower basically created an impassable zone of fire, making frontal assaults suicidal, guaranteeing stalemate.
And Bloch was largely ignored by the military establishment. The prevailing orthodoxy, the famous cult of the offensive, just refused to believe that technology could neuter the art of war.
They thought willpower could overcome bullets.
Essentially, yes. Figures like Marshal Foch in France, Bernhardi in Germany, they insisted technology just gave you better tools, but the moral element, sheer willpower, the French élan vital, was still decisive. Triumph of one will over a weaker one.
So that zone of death just had to be crossed by courage and mass attacks.
That was the belief. You just had to push through it. It seems incredible now, especially because the Germans had observers at the Russo-Japanese War. They saw the devastation caused by machine guns and modern artillery.
So why didn't they learn the lesson?
It's complex. They saw the destruction, yes, but they seem to interpret it as, well, the necessary cost of modern war. Something great powers just had to be willing to pay, rather than a fundamental tactical problem that invalidated their core operational ideas.
Their artillery techniques were actually quite advanced, weren't they? Indirect fire, heavy guns.
Technically, yes, superior in many ways. But the whole Schlieffen-Moltke plan still relied on that initial speed, that rapid advance. And that's precisely what machine guns and rapid-fire artillery made almost impossible. The plan required a rate of movement that technology had already forbidden.
And we see this whole intellectual failure just crash and burn at the First Battle of the Marne in 1914. McGrath's analysis is interesting here. He says it wasn't really a tactical defeat for Germany.
No, German units often won their local fights,
Oh,
but it was a massive strategic loss.
absolutely. The Marne was just a perfect storm of friction, command failures, and technological breakdown. First off, the command structure itself was shaky. Moltke the Younger, the nephew, was under immense psychological strain, and he was commanding from miles behind the front lines.
Not exactly leading from the front.
Not at all. And his army commanders, they were steeped in that Moltke the Elder tradition of independent command. They tended to see themselves as fighting their own battles almost, lacking that tight synchronization needed for the grand Schlieffen envelopment. And the most famous example is von Kluck, right? Colonel General Alexander von Kluck and the First Army.
Yes. He was trying to be proactive, applying Auftags tactic. He saw a chance to envelop the French flank and took it, changing his line of advance.
Sounds like initiative.
It was initiative, but it was uncoordinated initiative. By turning inwards, he opened up this huge, dangerous gap between his First Army and von Bülow's Second Army next to him.
Ah, so this is where that potential flaw in mission tactics really bites them.
It really does. Decentralized initiative only works if everyone is on the same page strategically, sharing the same mental map of the battle. Kluck's aggressive move, while tactically sound in isolation maybe, completely undermined the strategic coherence of the entire offensive wing.
And then communications just made everything worse.
Oh, communications were abysmal. It's easy to forget how limited they were. Moltke the Younger had actually ditched the telegraph system back in 1910, believing it wasn't mobile enough.
So they relied on radio.
Yes, bulky, unreliable early radio sets. And McGrath points out the coding and decoding process could delay messages by up to 26 hours.
26 hours, that's useless.
Completely useless. Strategic intelligence about the enemy's position from yesterday, obsolete. The command system that was designed for speed was actually being paralyzed by the speed of its own advance. Moltke was left increasingly in the dark and getting more and more pessimistic.
And that pessimism was the final nail in the coffin, wasn't it?
It seems so. Moltke, unsure what was really happening, sent his intelligence officer, Lieutenant Colonel Hensch, who was also quite cautious, out to the front. Hensch found the gap, spoke to the already worried Bülow, and basically authorized, or at least strongly advised, a retreat for the Second Army.
Which forced Kluck, despite his local successes, to pull back too.
Exactly. The entire right wing began to fall back. The Germans essentially surrendered the strategic initiative.
And the irony, as you mentioned, is the French, under Joffre's much more centralized command, were actually flexible enough on the ground to see that gap and exploit it.
They were. They plugged the gap, counterattacked, and the German advance stalled. And almost immediately, the war bogged down into the trenches. The Schlieffen Plan, the Vernichtungsschlacht, it was over. Not because of one decisive battle, but a systemic breakdown. Command, communication, friction, the whole concept failed its first real test.
So a catastrophic strategic failure. Moltke the Younger is replaced.
Yeah.
And the new chief of staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, he tries something completely different.
Yeah, Falkenhayn realized the quick victory wasn't happening. The Western Front was deadlocked. So he came up with this really quite chillingly calculated strategy of attrition focused on Verdun.
But it wasn't just attrition for attrition's sake, was it? He had a specific goal in mind.
No, it was quite sophisticated, intellectually at least. He knew Germany probably couldn't break the French army militarily anymore, so his goal at Verdun wasn't total victory, but to break France's will to fight, to bleed them white physically and morally until they despaired and sued for peace.
So, using military force to achieve a psychological objective against the entire nation, not just the army.
Yeah.
Kind of a combination of deterrence and attack.
Exactly. Target French national pride, their emotional attachment to the fortress city of Verdun. Make the cost of holding it unbearable.
But the plan went wrong. Terribly wrong.
Utterly wrong. The strategic goal was clever, maybe, but the operational execution completely betrayed it. Falkenhayn wanted to bleed France using artillery, preserving German manpower, but what did he do? He sent German infantry into repeated, costly assaults against one of the most heavily fortified areas on the planet.
So instead of calculated one-sided attrition, it became a mutual slaughterhouse.
Precisely. The operational tactics, these massive frontal assaults, were completely disconnected from the strategic aim of conserving German lives while expending French ones. Verdun just became the symbol of the military impasse of World War I, this total failure to align strategy, operational design, and battlefield tactics.
Falkenhayn's failure then leads to another major shift. Hindenburg and Ludendorff take over the Third Supreme Command. And this marks part 3. the ascent of military machine culture. It seems like the failure of pure professional strategy forced the military to basically embrace the industrial state with both arms.
That's exactly it. This is the turning point where the traditional military professional starts to morph into the manager of mass industrial violence. Ludendorff is the key figure here. He wasn't interested in Moltke's or Schlieffen's kind of idealistic strategy. He wanted victory, and he believed the way to get it was by harnessing the total power of the German state.
Moving towards total war.
Towards total war, and crucially towards what Geyer calls technocratic rule.
Technocratic rule. A technical dictatorship for purposes of the conduct of mass warfare. What did that actually mean in practice?
It meant Ludendorff saw everything, German industry, society, politics, as resources to be scientifically managed by military experts for the sole purpose of winning the war. Military work and politics became completely fused. The strategist wasn't an artist anymore. They were an engineer managing inputs and outputs.
Trying to rationalize violence itself.
Exactly, rationalize warfare. Subject every single aspect, tactics, training, logistics, home front production to maximum technical efficiency.
And what did that look like on the battlefield? We hear about new tactics.
Oh, the changes were dramatic. They threw out the old idea of holding a rigid front line. Instead, they developed defense-in-depth elastic defense, absorbing enemy attacks, channeling them into kill zones, counterattacking locally.
And training changed, too.
Massively. They got rid of a lot of the old parade ground drill. The focus shifted intensely onto small unit tactics, infiltration, the use of new weapons like light machine guns, mortars, grenades, preparing stormtroopers for the offensive.
So it wasn't about hierarchy anymore, but function, getting the most out of the machines.
Precisely. Functional organization replaced traditional hierarchy. The key question became, how do we optimally use the weapons we have? Success wasn't seen as coming from the art of generalship anymore, but from the scientific management of firepower and manpower. Material became more important than Geist, or spirit.
Instrumental rationality takes over. The weapons themselves start dictating the strategy.
In a way, yes. The means started to determine the ends, mobilizing all of society, all of industry. That wasn't just a tool for strategy anymore. It became the driving force behind strategy. Strategy lost its role as a limited instrument of policy and became, well, almost a justification for unlimited total war.
A political and ideological justification.
Right. And this opened the door to escalating war aims way beyond traditional power politics. It started tapping into those deeper ideological currents, the culture creed, the idea of a clash of civilizations.
People like Colonel Max Bauer, these military technocrats, they weren't just managers, they were often hardcore ideologues too, weren't they?
Absolutely. Bauer is a prime example. They believed unrestricted use of force was essential to break the enemy's will. And by framing the war in racial terms, Volkisch terms, they could mobilize the nation for this limitless struggle where achieving absolute victory justified anything.
It's a dark path. But, ironically perhaps, this technocratic approach, combined with the new tactics, did lead to some stunning tactical successes in 1918. The spring offensives, they actually broke the trench deadlock.
Tactically, they were brilliant. Stormtroop tactics, surprise, deep infiltration. They punched huge holes in the Allied lines that looked like they might actually win. But strategically, they were completely bankrupt.
How so?
Ludendorff essentially refused to set clear strategic objectives beyond just breaking through. His plan was just attack, break the line, and then hope. Hope that the breakthrough itself would somehow magically lead to a strategic decision. He just kept pouring troops and resources into the breaches.
Without a clear goal of what to do next?
Exactly. And the cost was unbelievable. Williamson Murray highlights this. They lost nearly 1 million men in those offensives. Ludendorff's strategy of total mobilization ended up being totally self-destructive.
It bled the German army dry.
Bled it white. They threw everything they had left into these attacks, and when the Allied counteroffensives came later that year, strengthened by fresh American troops, the Germans had nothing left to resist. The total war Ludendorff engineered led directly to total collapse.
So Germany comes out of World War I having tried and failed with both the idealistic short war strategy and the technocratic total war strategy. They're defeated, the Kaiser is gone, but that professional army, it still exists, and it's desperate to regain control and its sense of identity. Which brings us to part 4, the interwar years.
Right. The Weimar Republic era.
Right.
And for the German military planners now operating under the tight restrictions of the Treaty of Versailles, the big concerns were, well, how do we limit any future war? And how do we get strategy back under elite professional military control? Make war purposeful and instrumental again, not this total societal meltdown.
And the main figure initially is Hans von Sicht, head of the Army Command. What was his approach?
Siecht was all about restoring professionalism, discipline, the authority of the officer corps. He wanted to preserve that core identity. He wasn't against modernization tanks, aircraft, but it always had to serve the goal of professional autonomy. Meaning he still clung to the idea of a decisive, short, professionally executed military victory. That was the way to ensure the military, not politicians or society, stayed in control of warfare. The problem was, his actual strategic concepts, like planning for a potential war against Poland, often felt unrealistic, disconnected from Germany's actual weakness. More about military nostalgia than practical planning, as Geyer suggests.
But there was another faction pushing for more radical change, right? The Young Turks, embracing mobile warfare.
Yes, definitely. Figures like Werner von Frisch, and especially Heinz Guderian, they looked at the potential of tanks and aircraft and saw a way to resurrect the core Moltke principles, speed, maneuver, initiative, but in a totally new, mechanized form.
So not just tanks supporting infantry like in World War I.
No, that was the initial idea. But through exercises, war games, and just sheer intellectual effort, they developed the concept of tanks as an independent, decisive arm. Concentrated tank divisions or brigades, acting as the main offensive weapon, the Schlachtenscheidende Angriffswaffe.
The decisive weapon for the operation.
Exactly. It was a conscious break from the stalemate of the trenches. The focus shifted heavily to command through fast communication. Radio became vital rather than direct control of infantry masses. They wanted deep penetration, operational initiative, using armor to achieve what Schlieffen had failed to do.
Sounds brilliant on paper. But Weimar Germany wasn't exactly flush with cash or national unity.
Absolutely not. And that's where these innovative ideas hit a wall. Two huge problems. First, the underlying strategic concept often still assumed a Volkskrieg, a people's war, which needed a level of national unity that just wasn't there in the deeply divided Weimar Republic.
And a second problem.
Money. Simple as that. Large-scale mechanization, building thousands of tanks and aircraft, completely unaffordable. The budget just wasn't there. So you had these advanced operational concepts bumping up against harsh economic and political realities.
Which led to one last attempt from within the establishment to try a different path. Wilhelm Greiner.
Yes, Groner. He was actually a supporter of the old Schlieffen tradition, but he'd become a pragmatist. He looked at Germany's situation and concluded, we simply cannot fight another long defensive war of attrition. We're too weak.
So what was his alternative?
He proposed what you might call a strategy of expedience, particularly thinking about a potential conflict with Poland. As Jonathan House details, it was a mix. Some limited conventional military action, maybe a naval attack, but heavily reliant on non-military means.
Like diplomacy, international pressure.
Exactly. Using the League of Nations, diplomatic maneuvering, essentially integrating military action into a broader political strategy. Recognizing Germany couldn't win purely on military terms.
He was willing to politicize strategy, give up that sacred military autonomy.
He was. He was skeptical that Germany could wage autonomous warfare anytime soon. He argued military force had to be subordinate to political goals in negotiation. But the Orthodox officer corps, they hated it.
Why?
Because it challenged their core identity. Military autonomy, the idea that they controlled war, was paramount. Geyer talks about this military nostalgia. They rejected Groner's realism in favor of preserving their professional status and the dream of future decisive military action.
And by rejecting Groner's path, by clinging to that ideal of autonomy and the quick military fix, they basically paved the way for the National Socialists.
The timing couldn't have been worse. Just as the Nazis are rising, the military successfully fights off this internal challenge to its autonomy. It means when Hitler comes to power in 1933, the army has preserved its institutional independence, ready to oversee rearmament and plan operations, believing it can control the process. Which brings us to the final, catastrophic phase. Part 5, the apocalyptic climax.
Initially, it seems, the professional general staff, under Ludwig Beck, tried to impose their systematic approach onto the new Nazi regime.
They did. Beck really represented that revived strategic idealism. His Truppenführung manual, the new field regulations, insisted on a careful, systematic, holistic view of war. He saw any major European war as inevitably becoming long and multi-front.
So, plan accordingly. Prepare thoroughly.
Right. Beck's plan was rearm methodically, get fully prepared, and then consider offensive action maybe around 1940. The timing had to be dictated by military readiness, ensuring the general staff, the professionals, controlled the decision to go to war. Keep strategy meaningful and under military control.
But that methodical approach clashed completely with Hitler's style.
Totally. Hitler was opportunistic, impatient. He didn't care about Beck's 1940 timeline. He kept throwing out these contingency plans, Sonderfall, for quick grabs like Austria or Czechoslovakia, driven by short-term political goals, completely messing up Beck's systematic buildup.
So it became a power struggle, professional military control versus political opportunism.
The fundamental struggle. And Beck lost. He resigned in protest. The professional military, having guarded its institutional autonomy so fiercely, now effectively lost control over its strategic purpose. The tool remained sharp, but the hand guiding it had changed.
Leading to that final, dark fusion of ideology and technocracy.
This is the tragic culmination. The military professionals, even now, still tended to think of war as, well, a technical problem. How to skillfully use society and resources as raw material to achieve objectives.
But for the Nazis.
For the National Socialists, war wasn't just a tool, it was a way of life.
Right.
The military use of force became entirely subordinate to this grander project of national mobilization, racial purification, conquest as an end in itself, apocalyptic racist warfare.
And the general staff.
Yeah.
What happened to their planning?
After Beck resigned, and especially after the early successes, comprehensive, systematic planning kind of went out the window. It became much more ad hoc, opportunistic, responding to Hitler's directives. The professional military became incredibly efficient at maximizing the use of weapons, letting that technocratic skill serve purely ideological aims.
Which brings us to Blitzkrieg.
Yes, and it's crucial to understand what Blitzkrieg really was or wasn't. Geyer is very clear on this. It wasn't some perfectly coherent, pre-planned doctrine developed by the general staff.
He was more a style.
An operational style, exactly. A combination of things that worked. Concentrated tanks, dive bombers, motorized infantry, radio communication, emphasizing speed, shock, mobility, often prioritizing those over sheer firepower.
So less rigid plan, more improvisation, and commanders taking initiative.
Very much so. Driven by ambitious commanders on the ground, seizing opportunities, pushing the limits of their new equipment, there was this competitive element almost. And because it worked so spectacularly well against Poland and then France in 1940,
it looked like they had finally cracked it, found the short, decisive war they'd been chasing since 1914.
It certainly seemed that way. The speed, the collapse of France, it felt like validation. Like technology and operational art had finally overcome the stalemate.
But those amazing operational victories were hiding a huge strategic disaster waiting to happen.
Absolutely. Williamson Murray makes this point powerfully. By late 1940, early 1941, Germany had won stunning campaigns, but it was now facing a global war against the British Empire, soon the Soviet Union, and potentially the industrial might of the United States, for which it was totally fundamentally unprepared.
They had solved the tactical problem of trench warfare, the operational problem of maneuver.
But not the strategic problem of how to defeat enemies with vastly greater resources in a long war. That escalatory trap of attrition, the one that snapped shut in 1914, was closing in again. And this time, there was no escape. Germany simply didn't have the oil, the steel, the manpower, the economic base to sustain a global conflict.
And the invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, Operation Barbarossa, was the ultimate gamble based on that flawed premise. Seize resources quickly to fuel the global war.
It was the ultimate expression of that self-destructive fusion of ideology and technocracy, an invasion driven by racist ideology, Lebensraum, anti-communism, and a desperate strategic need for resources, but utterly divorced from logistical reality and a clear, achievable strategic end state.
And when that military victory in Russia stalled, when it became clear they couldn't win quickly.
The nature of the war shifted again internally. The National Socialist regime increasingly turned the violence inwards. The focus became extermination of Jews, of Slavs, of political opponents. The military machine, having lost its strategic purpose, became an instrument of genocide and terror alongside the SS and other party organs. Even the operational planning debates, like whether to prioritize Moscow or the Ukraine, often reflected competing internal ambitions rather than a unified strategic vision.
So that long quest for the short, decisive war, which started with Moltke's professional idealism, it ends in this nightmare of total self-inflicted attrition and ideological slaughter.
It's an incredibly bleak trajectory.
It really is. This has been, well, a sobering deep dive into this strategic evolution, or maybe devolution. So let's try to synthesize. What does this all really mean for us, looking back?
I think the clearest takeaway is this history, 1914 to 1945, serves as a profound cautionary tale. You have this highly professional, highly capable military institution obsessed with finding a way to win quickly and decisively.
Whether through those early idealistic concepts like Schlieffen's grand envelopment,
Or later through Ludendorff's attempt to rationalize and manage warfare like a giant
they
machine.
just kept failing to escape the reality of long, grinding attrition warfare.
A reality which, ironically, their own focus on mass mobilization of industrial and social resources helped create. The moment you have industrialized nations throwing their full weight into a conflict, attrition becomes almost the default setting.
And German strategy, always prioritizing the offense, always clinging to that idea of professional military autonomy, controlling a short war. It just kept getting tripped up by faulty assumptions, by friction, by the enemy, as they say, getting a vote.
Yeah, those initial calculations were almost always too optimistic, underestimating the enemy's resilience or the sheer difficulty of controlling huge armies moving at speed.
And Williamson Murray's point hangs heavy here, that virtually all the wars since 1500 among the Western powers have been long, drawn-out wars of attrition. It's a pretty stark historical pattern.
It really is. And it forces you to ask some uncomfortable questions about strategic thinking today, doesn't it?
It does. Which leads us to a final thought, something for you, our listeners, to maybe mull over, drawing from everything we've discussed.
Given this history,
Think about today. What are the modern versions of that old cult of the offensive? That belief, maybe hope, that some new technology could be cyber, could be precision weapons, AI-driven systems, novel deterrence ideas can somehow guarantee a quick, clean, decisive outcome.
and then ask, how might those contemporary beliefs, those hopes for a short war, potentially clash with that stubborn historical pattern? The pattern suggesting that once major powers commit their resources, conflict tends to spiral into devastating wars of endurance, regardless of the initial technological edge.
Something to definitely chew on as you think about strategy, technology, and their often brutal interaction throughout history.